In theory, in Vermeer, you're one of the 4 heirs to the fortune of one Mr. Walter von Gronschild, a fictional, well-known Berlin-based art collector and a head of a huge corporate empire. And your task is to use 50,000 marks given by him to recover his stolen collection of Vermeer paintings. Leaving the fact that 50,000 marks is nowhere near the amount required to do so aside, I'd like to repeat that it's all in theory, cause the game is much better played indefinitely. But before we get into details of this interesting title, please hit those like and subscribe buttons below. It's just a click here and click there for you, but helps me more than you know. Thanks. And it's all theoretical because even though I've played Vermeer for years on both C64 and then later Amiga, I've never aimed for that game's ending target. The gameplay loop is so enjoyable, especially in up to 4 players multiplayer mode, that just getting those fortunes bigger and bigger is fun enough for all involved. I treated Vermeer more as a trading and economy simulation, rather than one that had some elusive and prearranged ending. But for the sake of this review, let's assume that this task is actually at least semi-important. The game only ever came out in German, and I don't speak it. All I can say really is ja and nein, which is yes and no, gebratene Ente mit Apfeln, so baked duck with apples, and ich möchte ein Kleid kaufen, meaning I want to buy a skirt. It's easy to guess that I've never used the latter two and don't really expect to use them for the rest of my life. But in Vermeer, I know how and where to do everything. The game is so good that by using trial and error as a kid, I worked all the mechanics out. So I feel that I'm at least semi-competent for reviewing it, even though it's in language I never understood. I will be showing the game on both C64 and Amiga for this video, and will try to loosely follow the similar in-game path, where possible that is, so that you could clearly see the minuscule differences between them. There were also Amstrad CPC, Atari ST and PC versions too, but Commodores were the best and the ones I played as a kid, so that's why I naturally gravitated towards these. Gameplay-wise, they're all identical, so if you like what you see here, and you can only play Vermeer on the other systems, just go for it, as this review itself is platform neutral. Coming back to the subject at hand though, it's 1918, the very end of the First World War, and you're in Berlin. The world needs to rebuild, people are hungry, and the markets are about as stable as I am leaving a pub on a Friday night. You're also 50,000 marks up and have seemingly impossible task of recovering millions worth of paintings for given money. Since it's not achievable as is, you need to somehow change the money at hand into said millions. Now, there are a few ways of doing so, some more sustainable than others. For one, you can invest in stock market and hope that one of the companies will eventually turn a nice profit. The game is semi-scripted, at least in the beginning, so initially it's not a bad bet if you just happen to choose the right one. As far as I remember, Lloyd was usually a good first bet, but don't quote me on that. You can also convert your marks into dollars and hope that monetary value differences will provide income, but that's hardly a good choice if you don't have millions already. And to be quite honest, not something I ever did. Perhaps someone found a way to turn it into a worthy endeavor, but I didn't. And there's also art trade, where you buy and sell paintings at auctions. They take place at specific dates in various major hubs in Europe and in the US. This is more of a late early to mid-game thing though, as it requires some saved up money. Keep it in mind at all times for 2 reasons however. For one, it's the only way de facto to win the game if you're into it, and that is done by buying all original Vermeer paintings on art auctions. Knockoffs don't count towards it. But most importantly, paintings can be considered as gold of this game, meaning they more or less keep their original value and don't get impacted by inflation as much as the other holdings do, at least if purchased at reasonable price. So, it's good to invest your excessive money in them later on, as in the mid-war times inflation was crazy and the markets were so unstable that they could collapse at any given time. The very first of these recessions is scheduled in-game, others, I believe, but honestly I'm not sure, are randomized and come in waves every couple of years, I think. And finally, the most sustainable and most profitable in the long run way of making money is coffee, tobacco, tea and cocoa trade. This requires more involvement however, as you need to first travel to a place where such crop can be grown, then purchase both land for plantation and appropriate seeds, then plant those seeds, hire workers and wait for plants to grow. Ready crops can either be sold at market prices or for special, usually quite much higher, contracted price. You have to remember that to sell any of them in London or NYC, the only places you can really do that, you have to physically be present there, or have it stocked there in a warehouse if selling by use of contracts. So, it's good to always have some money unspent for travel, workers' wages, crop transport and other unexpected expenses. And since we're on the subject of contracts, it's a good practice to not aim too high. It's better to take smaller, more secure contract rather than overpromise on the amount you can deliver and then fail to do so, as penalties for unfulfilled contracts are huge, and they can, in extreme and catastrophic cases, even lead to bankruptcy. Vermeer is also full of random events. Some of them are small, like birthdays of various players, extra plentiful or extra small harvests, through worker strikes and demands for races, to bigger, more impactful historic events and a total financial market collapses. So even though the gameplay loop, while fun, does not seem very extensive, there's always something unknown behind the corner that adds to replayability of the title. The game of Vermeer is played in turns, each of these corresponding to one day, and everything in-game is heavily time-based. The crops need time to grow, workers will only work as long for the same wage, all contracts have very specific hard time limit, and art auctions take place at precise dates and places. Finally, even shipping of goods and travel is not instant. It's important then to always remember when and where everything is scheduled to be done. But also the very same use of turn/day mechanic allows for simultaneous multiplayer gameplay where everyone quite literally plays at the same time, but one after another. It's difficult to really talk about any sound or music design of Vermeer. Other than clicks and clacks when news are printed on the screen letter by letter, and beeps of the interface when buttons are pressed, there's no other sound to speak of, at all. Graphics-wise, it's not any better. Everything is easily understandable, yet plain. So while you won't mistake a plantation for a bank window, you will also not see anything that will grab your attention in the slightest, as the difference between Vermeer's graphics and Excel sheets is honestly not that big. Fortunately, while presentation in most games is important, Vermeer's strength is in its gameplay mechanics, so workable graphics and sounds are in this particular case acceptable. Sadly, Vermeer is a game that had very limited impact on history of gaming, despite coming early in 1987 and being quite ingenious. All because it was only ever released in German. And not everyone was as interested in trade and financial management games as I was. Ultimately, it's a pity, because if it was more accessible then perhaps now, a couple of sequels that it spawned years later would be more well known and popular. It's a pretty good game alone and fantastic alongside others. Because apart from buying of land from one another, players don't exactly compete against each other per se, and just strive to get to the same elusive objective in parallel. In the end, because of how much I love it and how fun it is in multiplayer, despite the language barrier, I rate Vermeer on both systems at a solid 7 out of 10 when played alone and 8 out of 10 with others. Toasty! Thanks a lot for hanging out with me until now. I hope you liked the video, as there's more coming soon. If you did, punch those like and subscribe buttons as if they deserved a serious beating. It's just a series of clicks for you, but helps me quite a lot actually. And if you're in an especially generous mood, you may want to consider a small donation. It will help me make more better videos, upgrade my aging editing rig, and maybe even get a camera. Details are in the description below. For me, however, as always, this is all, so I'll see you next time.